Started my own business at 19, debt-free and a homeowner before they believed in me. By 23, I cleared 100% debt and bought a house in cash. Then my family sued me, claiming I stole my sister's life. I'm Nico, 27, and if there's one thing I've learned about family, it's that they can know everything about you except who you actually are. When people hear the headline of "My life started my own business at 19, paid off every sin I owed, and later bought a house in cash," they picture a confident guy who knew what he was doing from the start. The truth is less glamorous and a lot more ordinary. I was the kid who fixed remote controls with toothpicks, who cleaned his own shoes with dish soap, who learned early that if you wanted something, you found a way to build it from scraps. We didn't have much, and I don't say that like a violin cue. It's just the texture of my childhood. Mom kept jars for everything. Sugar jar, rice jar, jar for loose screws. Dad kept habits the way other dads kept fishing trophies. Neat rows of phrases he'd pull out whenever he needed them. A man doesn't complain. And pay your debts first. And don't get too big for your shoes or you'll trip. He said that last one a lot. There were 4 of us in the house: Mom, Dad, my younger sister Talia, and me. The running joke, at least I thought it was a joke when I was little, was that I was oldest by responsibility, youngest by priority. I did the mowing, the trash, the cable guy walkthroughs, the pets sitting when Aunt Drea dropped off her yappy Pomeranian on our porch like we were a boarding house. Talia had a different orbit. She's 24 now, bright and quick with words. The kind of person who makes waiters laugh and teachers lean forward. When we were kids, she'd drift through the kitchen like the house owed her sunlight. It wasn't malicious then, just the air around her. People gave her things. Teachers gave her second chances. Neighbors gave her rides. If I wanted something, I learned to ask myself first. If Talia wanted something, the whole living room became a family project. That pattern is what made my first little business possible and miserable at the same time. At 14, I scrated every busted phone and old laptop people in our neighborhood planned to throw out. I watched videos, took notes, and found I had steady hands and a certain calm for tiny screws. I'd sit at the kitchen table with a magnifying lamp clipped to the edge and tell Mom I was saving for a thing. She'd shake her head at the spread cotton swabs isopropyl, a tray full of screws like glitter. Nico, at least put a towel down. Your father eats on that table. Meanwhile, Talia would wander in, hold up one of the screens, and gasp at her reflection. Do you think this could be a mirror? It's kind of aesthetic. She'd set it down scratch-free, then grab my notebook to doodle an elaborate cursive T on the corner of my parts list. Her initials are still on some of my early work orders in pencil, a ghost of the way things always overlapped. At 19, I made the jump. Someone in our town lost their lease on a tiny corner unit between a laundromat and a bakery, and the landlord wanted it filled fast. I had been biking around with a backpack of tools, fixing things at people's kitchen tables for $40 and a "you should open a shop." The rent for that unit was more than I'd ever seen in one place. But the math worked. If I had a sign and a counter and a place for people to leave their devices, I could do 10 times the work. I asked Mom if she'd co-sign. She shushed me as if the air itself might break. Your father will think you're getting too big for your shoes. Dad sat quiet at first, then said the thing he always said when he didn't want to give a straight answer. What are you willing to suffer for it? It wasn't permission, but it wasn't a no. I found a way without them. I sold the only thing I had with any value. A beat-up car that I loved more for what it represented than how often it worked and covered 3 months of rent in one painful swallow. I bought a secondhand glass display case from a store that had gone under a cheap cash drawer, a neon sign that glowed open like it was optimistic for both of us. The first week, I stared at the clock. The second week, the bakery owner across the hall brought me a busted blender. Then a teacher brought 3 Chromebook carts. A delivery driver came in with a phone so shattered it looked like frost. And I impressed myself by bringing it back to life. Word of mouth did what advertising couldn't. By the end of the year, I had paid back the microloan AA community program, gave me stocked a tidy inventory, and learned how to talk to people who were stressed and suspicious and anxious about their data. I started sleeping the sleep of a person who doesn't owe anyone money. At home, the temperature never quite matched the weather. On paper, Mom and Dad were proud. They showed their friends the little local write-up the paper did on the teen entrepreneur fixing our digital lives. But the tone slipped sometimes. Dad couldn't help himself. His advice was a nervous tick. Don't hire too fast, he'd warned before he asked about my day. Don't buy anything you can't carry yourself. Mom's pride had a soft pity in it, like I was playing house. It's nice you're keeping busy, she'd say, stirring a pot, until you figure out what you'll really do. Talia hovered like a visiting dignitary, plucking her tongue at my retail hours and saying it like it tasted sour. I could never. She'd announce at family dinners, "I need creative freedom. I need people." I kept thinking that if she had ever spent a day with me behind that counter fielding the parade of personalities, the quiet panic when someone thought their photos were gone forever, she'd see there was more people there than she knew what to do with. But I stopped trying to explain my days to her. It made her feel like she was losing some invisible race she hadn't trained for. The first hint that my work made me an obligation instead of an adult came during Talia's 19th birthday. I had a rush job that day, 12 school laptops to recover before midterms. So I showed up late to the family lunch with a gift and a grease stain on my sleeve. The restaurant was one of those places that tries to be expensive by dimming the lights. Everyone was already seated. Mom in a cream blouse, Dad in the shirt he wore for every important photo, Aunt Da holding court, and Talia glowing like she'd walked in from an ad. There were balloons tied to her chair and a cake box on the sideboard. I slid into my seat and apologized. Talia pouted for effect. "We started without you." It was teasing, but it stuck. When the check came, the waiter placed it in the center of the table like a bouquet. Without missing a beat, Mom nudged it toward me with one finger, eyes hot with a kind of satisfied testing. She didn't do it rudely. That's what made it worse. It was automatic like muscle memory. I had cash on me because I always did, then still half stuck in the habit of paying vendors face to face. It would have been easy to just take it to confirm whatever story Mom had started telling herself about me and responsibility. But I hesitated. And in that hesitance, there was a quiet breath of truth. They weren't proud. They were taking inventory. Dad rescued the moment by pulling the bill closer. "I've got this," he said, but his eyes flicked to me quick and searching like maybe I'd offer to split it. The room tightened around the space where my hands weren't moving. Aunt Drea laughed in this small musical way she has that manages to sound kind and cutting at once. "Look at our little businessman. He's frugal. Good sign." Talia widened her eyes at me as if to ask if I was serious. I kept my hands folded under the table and said evenly, "I'll get dessert." It was nothing. It shouldn't have meant anything. But when we got up to leave, Mom squeezed my arm and whispered, "Family helps family. Nico, don't get used to hiding." The language of that day, how it was said, how it wasn't hung around like fog. I started noticing smaller versions everywhere. If the sink broke at Andretas, I was suddenly everyone's first call, not for plumbing, but to negotiate a discount with the actual plumber because I had business sense. If Talia wanted a new laptop for her creative work, I was expected to either sell her one at cost or find a way. She loved that phrase, "find a way," as if ways were printed like coupons in the back of my receipts. And when Mom's friend needed a phone unlocked, she brought it over in a grocery bag with a tin of cookies and said, "You're so fast, dear. You'll do it in your sleep." I tried not to turn into a ledger. I still brought over bread from the bakery next to my shop. Still picked up groceries for Mom when I finished late, but I started noticing how my generosity was narrated in the family. The strange alchemy where voluntary kindness curdled into expected duty. Dad praised me to his colleagues as an example of good discipline, then pulled me aside later to remind me about humility, and could I sponsor Talia's trip to a weekend conference that might expand her network. Mom would swap stories with neighbors about my shop saving a grandmother's photos, then tell me that it seemed a little tacky to put my name on the sponsorship banner at Talia's event. "It should be from the family," she said, sipping tea. "You don't want to make it look like you're buying affection." The banner at the conference read, "Proudly supported by Talia's family." I tucked the invoice into my file and told myself it didn't matter what anyone else saw. The first real sting, the one that made my shoulders stiffen when I thought about home, happened on a Sunday that was supposed to be restful. We were eating soup, the window was open, the smell of laundry detergent drifted in from somewhere else in the neighborhood. Talia was scrolling through her phone, laughing at something I couldn't see. "I'm going to start an agency," she declared, spoon hovering midair. "Consulting content branding. People want identity." Mom clasped her hands like she'd just been told a secret from heaven. "There it is," she cooped. "That's your calling. You just need the right start." Dad nodded as if nodding could build a foundation. "Everyone needs a partner," he said to me as if reading a script. "And your sister has the vision. You have the structure. It's natural." Talia didn't look at me. She looked through me. "Well, at least until it takes off. Then I'll get clients who can actually pay." I smiled. That tight smile you learn as a customer service person. The one that says, "I heard the words," and packaged them neatly so they don't stain me. I said I was swamped, that my little counter already held my attention generously, that it wasn't the right fit. Mom tilted her head as if I had missed a cue. "Don't be small, Nico. Think of the family." Talia finally looked up, smiling in that bright way that mansions advertise. "It's cute that you're trying to be independent," she said lightly, and the word cute landed like a pebble in my shoe that I couldn't shake out. Dad stirred his soup and said, "Don't get too big for your shoes," which at that moment felt like the opposite of everything they were asking me to be. I know how this sounds. You might be thinking, okay, so your family leaned, so they nudged, so they wanted you to share. Isn't that what families do? And you'd be right if not for the way the math kept changing to make me smaller. If not for how my no never counted while Talia's maybe was treated like a full-throated yes from the universe. If not for how I kept being measured in what I could undo for other people, rather than what I was building for myself. That's what cued me to start tucking things away. My receipts, my budgets, my plans. Not because I wanted to hide, but because I could feel the gravitational pull of a story that wasn't mine. They had a version of my life where I was the scaffolding. They were building a house for Talia, and I was supposed to be the beams you never see in the photos. The very first hint of where that story would try to bend came in a small, almost silly moment that attached itself to a larger shadow. I kept an envelope behind a stack of outdated brochures in my desk at the shop. A little emergency fund I'd started back when I thought banks were for people who never feared overdrafts. It wasn't much now. Old habits are hard to break. One afternoon, Talia stopped by unannounced. She was wearing sunglasses indoors, which she does sometimes when she wants to feel like an event. She perched on the stool at my counter and spun slowly like a kid. "I need a favor," she sang. Her voice always goes lighter right before she asks for something. "My friend Mia's laptop. It's being stubborn. I told her you're a magician." I took the laptop, logged the intake, did my usual cheerful confession that I'm good but I'm not a miracle worker, and cracked a joke until she laughed. We chatted while the system diagnostics ran. She told me about a brand pitch that might happen if another pitch happened. She told me that once a barista gave her a drink for free because he liked her earrings, which made her wonder if she should design earrings. It was the kind of conversation we always had, full of ideas like soap bubbles. They're beautiful until you touch them. When she went to the restroom, I stepped into the back to check a shipment. I came back out to find Talia leaning across the counter, room-edging in the cubby where I keep pens, tape, and my work schedule. Her hand slid over the brochures, and I saw the corner of my envelope peeking in the wrong direction. I didn't say anything then. Maybe she was just looking for a pen. Maybe I was being paranoid. She snapped upright and smiled too fast. "You should really keep this place tidier," she scolded in a playful tone. "It's going to embarrass you when you get famous." She left with a promise to tag my business on her story. The door behind her in that jangly, familiar way. The shop felt suddenly 2 sizes too small. That night after closing, I counted the envelope. It was short, not by a lot, not enough to cause a scene. Enough to make me feel like I'd miscounted or spent something and forgotten. Enough to give me an off-ramp from the discomfort if I wanted one. I could imagine telling myself a comforting lie and sleeping, but the lie got stuck on the way out, and I stood there with the envelope in my hands, feeling like someone had moved a picture in a room I knew blindfolded. I didn't accuse her. I didn't tell Mom. I just adjusted. I shifted the envelope to a different place. I bought a little lockbox and wedged it under a stack of blank invoice paper. I started locking the back room even when I only stepped out front for 10 seconds. Petty protections felt like wearing a helmet in a house, but it made that unsettled feeling quiet down. The next week, when Talia stopped by with another friend and another favor, I was ready with smiles and forms and small talk. She laughed. She hugged me from behind and told me I was the best brother, which came out like a charm she pinched between her fingers before tossing into a fountain. Then, in the soft way, small things balloon into weather systems. The first real storm cloud rolled in. Sunday again, soup again. This time the window was closed. Mom set her spoon down as if to punctuate something only she could hear. Talia got invited to a retreat. She said, eyes bright. It's in the mountains. Coaches, mentors, connections. Her ticket is considerable. She said the last word like it had angles. Dad cleared his throat and folded his arms as if he were preparing to agree with whatever would come out of Mom next. Talia looked at her phone, then lifted her gaze to me as if she had been instructed to do so in a scene. "It's an investment," she said. In my future, I waited. I knew my role in this play. So did they. No one telegraphed it, but the expectation hummed between us, a little bee of assumption. I stared at the table at the Nick where Dad had once opened a bottle with a knife. I thought about my hours, my hands, my sleep. I thought about that envelope that had come up short and all the little ways I could be talked out of being weary. I thought about how many times I had softened a boundary to make someone else feel comfortable and called it love. Mom put her hand over mine in a way that used to comfort me when I was small. Your sister deserves a good start, she murmured. And in those words, I heard the floor creak under a weight I hadn't agreed to carry. I looked at Talia. She didn't look back. Dad added, "You're the practical one." Nico, as if practicality was a currency I was meant to spend only one way. The room went quiet in the way rooms do when they've been edited to remove all the parts that belong to you. I opened my mouth, not even sure what I was about to say. Maybe a compromise, maybe a line, maybe a question about terms and clarity and the shape of that investment. When my phone buzzed on the table, it was a text from the landlord of my shop. "Call me when you can, something you should see." I looked up at three faces across the soup and the steam and the familiarity. I had a feeling in my spine like the moment before a bridge dips. I picked up the phone, and when I saw the photo he'd sent my shop front, the door slightly ajar and a small neat note taped to the glass in handwriting I recognized like my own heartbeat, I felt the air narrow. The note was short. It used my name, and it started with the words, "Family helps family." My landlord's text kept burning in my hand, but I didn't open it again right away. I slid the phone into my pocket and forced myself to finish the meal listening as Mom outlined all the reasons this retreat was exactly what Talia needed. Each point was framed like an investment pitch networking exposure skills she could bring back to the family. But every time Mom said the family, it was clear she meant her daughter, the one who could do no wrong. My role was simply to bankroll the vision. Dad kept nodding in agreement, occasionally adding something like, "You only get these chances once, and if your sister wins, we all win." It sounded noble on the surface, but I could feel the weight of the unspoken. If she fails, it will be your fault for not helping enough. I didn't commit. I told them I'd think about it, which was code for "I'm not agreeing to this on the spot." Talia didn't push, but she didn't need to. She just smiled like she already knew the outcome and went back to her phone fingers tapping out messages that I imagined were updates to her friends about how she'd be gone for the weekend to some mountaintop mastermind. After lunch, I drove straight to the shop. The sun was low and the light hit the front glass in a way that made the taped note almost glow. I stood outside for a long second before unlocking the door. The handwriting was unmistakable. Talia's loopy, overconfident script. "Nico borrowed the emergency fund for the retreat deposit. I'll pay you back once I land my first client. Family helps family." I read it twice. The door was locked, but the deadbolt had been left open, meaning someone with a key. My key had been inside. My stomach felt like a vice was turning. I checked the lockbox in the back. Sure enough, the envelope was gone. No spare change, no IOU, nothing but a faint smell of the vanilla lotion she always wore. I didn't call her, not yet. I sat in the back room staring at the wall while the hum of the fridge in the bakery next door bled through. The betrayal itself wasn't even the whole sting. It was the certainty with which she'd done it, as if my boundaries were paper doors she could push through any time. She hadn't asked. She hadn't even left room for a no. She just assumed that because she wanted something, I'd agree. Or if I didn't, she'd take it anyway. When I got home that night, the living room was full of laughter. Mom and Talia were on the couch looking at pictures of the retreat venue on her laptop. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Mom said without looking at me. "She's going to do so well there." Talia looked up, met my eyes, and gave me the same smile she'd given at the restaurant earlier, the one that said, "We both know how this works." I didn't bring up the note. I didn't ask about the lockbox. Something in me knew that if I did, I'd be outnumbered in seconds. Mom would soften it into a misunderstanding. Dad would make it about the bigger picture. And Talia would tilt her head and act like I was being dramatic, maybe even joke about charging me interest when she paid me back. No. If I wanted my point to land, I'd need proof timing and the kind of silence that makes people uneasy before the words even come. Over the next week, I started noticing things that had probably been there all along, but which I'd brushed aside. Mom talking about our business when she meant mine, but only in the context of how it could benefit Talia. Dad hinting that maybe I should branch out into marketing because your sister's already got the audience. Talia dropping into the shop with friends using my counter like her personal meeting space, introducing me not as her brother, but as the tech guy who could fix anything because I've trained him well. She'd say it with a laugh, and her friends would laugh too, assuming it was just sibling banter. But I felt that same pebble in the shoe irritation every time. The retreat became the centerpiece of every conversation at home. Mom printed the itinerary and stuck it on the fridge like it was a family vacation. Dad started talking about how once Talia gets established, she can help you expand. Not if, but once, as though her success was inevitable and mine was just a stepping stone. 2 nights before she was set to leave, I came home late and found her in the driveway leaning against my car. She was scrolling her phone wearing the oversized sunglasses again, even though it was dark. "Hey," she said without looking up, "you don't mind if I borrow your car for the weekend, right? It's just easier than renting." I stared at her. "You mean for the retreat?" She nodded, still scrolling. "Yeah, saves me money and I'll keep it clean." She said it like she was doing me a favor. Something inside me shifted right then. Not an explosion, but the quiet click of a lock turning. I knew in that moment that whatever line existed between generosity and exploitation had been crossed miles ago, and they were still walking like the road belonged to them. I told her I'd think about it. She smiled, patted the hood of my car, and said, "I knew you'd be cool about it." Later that night, I checked my shop security footage. I don't know what I was hoping for. Maybe to prove myself wrong to see someone else's face on the grainy feed. But there she was, clear as daylight, coming in with her own key, heading straight to the back room without so much as a glance at the counter. She didn't hesitate. She didn't search. She went right for the lockbox, pulled the envelope, and slipped it into her tote. She even paused to fix her hair in the security monitor before leaving. I sat there in the dark, watching the footage loop, my hands tightening around the edge of my desk. It wasn't just the theft. It was the ease, the comfort, the way she'd moved through my space like it was hers. Because in her mind, it was. And that's when I realized something that made my stomach turn. If she could walk into my shop and take my savings without blinking, what else would she feel entitled to? What was stopping her from treating everything I'd built as her personal launchpad? The answer, I knew, was me. And I also knew they weren't going to like it when I finally drew that line. The morning of Talia's retreat departure started with an unusual amount of cheer in the house. Mom was in the kitchen making pancakes, something she only did on birthdays or when she was particularly pleased with herself. Dad was dressed like he was heading to church even though it was a Friday. Talia was in the middle of the living room, suitcase, open clothes and accessories spilling out like she was staging a photo shoot for some travel magazine. I walked in with my coffee and sat at the edge of the couch trying to read the atmosphere. Everyone was buzzing with that particular energy families get when they're about to send someone off with too much praise and not enough questions. "Oh, Nico," Mom said like she'd just remembered I existed. "Perfect timing. Could you help load her bags into your car?" I glanced up. "My car." "Yes," she said, already flipping another pancake. "She'll take it up to the mountains. Safer than renting. And she won't have to worry about the deposit." I kept my face still. "We talked about this. I never said she could take it." Talia didn't even look up from folding a dress. "Mom said it'd be fine." I set my coffee down, the sound sharper than I meant it to be. I didn't. Dad stepped in, his voice calm, but with that undertone of command he reserved for moments he wanted to end quickly. "Nico, it's family. You can't nickel and dime trust. She'll bring it back in one piece." I almost laughed at that trust. After the lockbox, after the envelope, after walking into my shop like she owned the place. But I didn't. I just said no. The room froze for a beat. Mom looked over her shoulder spatula in midair. "Excuse me," I said. "No," I repeated more firmly. "I'm not lending her my car. She already took something from me without asking, and I'm not letting it happen again." That got their attention. Talia's hand still illed on her suitcase. "What are you talking about?" "The money from my lockbox," I said. "For your retreat. I have security footage of you taking it." Her expression didn't shift into guilt or apology. It hardened. "Oh my God, you're seriously going to make a thing out of that?" "I told you I'd pay you back. It's an investment. It's theft," I corrected. Mom stepped in before I could say more, her tone sharp now. "Nico, don't throw words like that around. She's your sister. She needed help, and you've always had more than you need." That line hit me harder than I expected. More than you need. As if my work, my savings, my caution, and my long nights were some lucky accident I didn't deserve to hold on to. "I worked for that money," I said. "I didn't take it from anyone else. I didn't walk into someone's business with a spare key and enough." Dad cut in. "If you can't support your sister without making her feel guilty, maybe you should think about why you're so protective of your things. It's not healthy." Talia zipped her suitcase like the conversation was over. "You're being dramatic. I'll bring your car back with a full tank." "Okay." She reached for the keys on the counter, and that's when something in me broke. Not a loud, angry break, but the quiet kind. "You don't come back from." I stepped forward and took them before she could. "You're not taking it," I said evenly. "And after this, you're not welcome in my shop again without me there." The silence that followed wasn't shock. It was insult. Mom's face tightened like she was holding back words. Dad looked at me like I just failed some unspoken test. Talia rolled her eyes and muttered, "Unbelievable." I thought that was the end of it. I thought maybe she'd sulk, take the bus, and gossip to her friends about how unreasonable I was. But when I went to the shop later that day to get some work done before the weekend, my stomach dropped the second I turned onto the street. The door was wide open. I sprinted inside. The counter computer was gone. My display case was empty. Every repair ticket, every customer device gone. The back room was stripped of my tools, the lockbox my personal laptop. It was as if the shop had been gutted in under an hour. On the counter, there was a single folded note, my name on the front, inside written in the same looping handwriting as the last one. "This is just a loan. I'll pay you back when my business takes off. Don't overreact. Family helps family." I just stood there holding the note, staring at the hollow shell of everything I'd built since 19, feeling the slow, sinking realization that this wasn't just a sibling crossing a line. This was an open declaration that nothing I had would ever be mine in their eyes. I stood in the middle of my shop long after the bakery next door turned off its lights. The smell of bread fading into the smell of dust and nothing. My hands were still holding that note, but it felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Every shelf I'd stocked, every tool I'd saved up for every repair ticket waiting to be finished, gone. I knew the insurance wouldn't cover most of it. The policies I could afford didn't protect against internal disputes or consensual access. The landlord's security camera only covered the front sidewalk, not the inside. And if I called the police, well, I already knew how that conversation would go. It wouldn't be theft in their eyes, not with her having a key. It would be a family matter. That phrase, family matter, kept echoing in my head all the way home. By the time I reached the driveway, the lights in the house were off. No one was waiting for me. No one had called to check if I'd seen the shop yet. It was as if they knew exactly what had happened and were just letting the silence do the work. I didn't go inside. Instead, I sat in my car for over an hour, the street lamp buzzing above me, my coffee from the morning still half full in the cup holder. I replayed the last few years in my mind. The sacrifices, the missed dinners, the way I'd learned to patch holes in my own roof before I'd call anyone else for help. And how every single step I'd taken forward had been treated like a communal bank account they could dip into whenever it suited them. For the next week, I ran on autopilot. I still opened the shop, what was left of it, because I couldn't afford to close completely. Customers came in, some asking where their repairs were, others offering sympathy once they noticed the stripped-down shelves. I lied more than I told the truth. Renovating, I'd say, upgrading inventory. I didn't want to give anyone the satisfaction of knowing I'd been robbed by my own sister. At home, it was business as usual for everyone else. Mom chatted about Talia's transformative retreat like it was the second coming. Dad reminded me over dinner that resentment is a debt you pay twice. Talia texted once, a breezy, "I'll have your stuff back soon, promise?" I didn't reply. Instead, I started clearing space, not just in the shop, but in my head. I went through every drawer and cabinet at home and boxed up anything I couldn't replace. Important documents went into a fireproof safe I bought with what little savings I still had. I changed the locks on my apartment door without telling anyone, even though Mom complained when she came by and her spare key no longer worked. At the shop, I started keeping double sets of records, one on paper, one digital, both offsite. I stopped telling them about big jobs, new clients, or how much I was making. I didn't know exactly what my plan was yet, but I knew it would start with this. No one in my family would ever have unfiltered access to my life again. But late at night, when the streets were quiet and the hum of my old fridge was the only sound in my apartment, I'd let the weight settle. I'd think about the years I spent building something from scratch, only to have it gutted by the one person who should have had my back. I'd think about how my parents looked at me not as a son, but as an endless source of help they never had to earn. And every time those thoughts came, I'd see that empty shop floor in my mind. The silence, the hollow shelves, the note in her handwriting, that image stopped hurting after a while. It started sharpening into something else entirely, because the longer they thought I was just licking my wounds, the more time I had to build something they'd never see coming. It's strange how quickly the ground can feel solid again once you stop expecting certain people to steady you. The first step in clawing my way back wasn't rebuilding the shop exactly as it was cutting the dead weight. I terminated the lease a month earlier than planned, selling off what little remained to a friend in the repair business. It hurt to let the place go, but the idea of pouring more money into a space where Talia had strolled in and gutted me felt like keeping an old wound open. Instead, I pivoted. A former customer, a small business owner named Marco, offered me a corner of his computer parts warehouse for a fraction of what I'd been paying in rent. The deal came with two perks: a locked shared security system with full indoor camera coverage and the kind of gate key you couldn't just borrow from a family member. I set up a small workstation in the back, started taking appointments by referral only, and kept everything lean. I didn't even put up a sign at first. Word of mouth was my filter. Without rent eating up most of my revenue, my savings started to crawl back faster than I'd expected. I stopped thinking in terms of survival and started thinking in terms of leverage. By month 3, I'd invested in a portable setup that let me do on-site repairs for businesses. It turned out people would pay a lot more for convenience, and soon I had regular contracts with a law firm, a boutique hotel, and a photography studio. Meanwhile, my personal life became a fortress. I cut the number of family dinners in half, always with an excuse. Late jobs, client emergencies, networking events. The less I showed up, the less they seemed to track me. And when I did see them, I spoke in vague, non-committal updates. Work's fine, keeping busy. Nothing new. I could see the curiosity in their faces, especially Talia's. She hated not knowing. What she didn't know was that I was building something far bigger than my old shop ever was. By month 6, I partnered with Marco to launch an online storefront selling refurbished electronics and hard-to-find replacement parts. He handled logistics. I handled repairs and quality checks. We split the profits cleanly, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had both control and momentum. The best part, my income was now invisible to anyone who thought they had a claim to it. Every cent went through a separate account they didn't know existed, with a business entity registered under a name that wouldn't ring any bells. If they searched, all they'd see was the closed storefront and maybe a few ghost mentions of me doing small jobs on the side. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about space, mental, emotional, physical. I started going to the gym before work just to burn off the leftover frustration that had built up from years of being treated like the family's resource instead of its member. I learned to cook more than 3 decent meals, something I'd always put off because I was too busy. I even took a short trip to the coast. 3 days of doing nothing but walking along the water, my phone on silent. The more I pulled away, the more they seemed to notice in subtle ways. Mom started calling instead of texting. Dad began asking more specific questions about my work, like he was fishing for details he used to take for granted. And Talia showed up at the warehouse once uninvited, pretending she was in the neighborhood. She looked around like she was trying to map the place in her head. I gave her the tour, but only through the front office, nowhere near where the real work happened. Her smile was tight when she left. That was when I knew she suspected I was doing better than I let on. And that was fine, because by then, I had enough distance, enough security, and enough quiet progress that even if she guessed the truth, she wouldn't be able to touch it. But I also knew something else. People like Talia don't just let go when they think they're owed something. They look for the next opportunity. They wait. Which is why when the next family emergency came knocking, I was ready in a way they didn't see coming. It started with a phone call from my mother on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I was in the middle of a bulk order for the photography studio, 30 laptops being re-imaged for an event, and my phone buzzed with her name. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something about the timing felt deliberate. Her voice was syrupy sweet, at first the way it always is when she's trying to ease into something unpleasant. "Nico, sweetheart, how's work? Keeping busy?" She barely let me answer before her tone shifted into what I recognized as her serious news voice. "Your father and we've been worried. Your sister's business has been struggling these last few months. It's hard for her to talk about, but she's in a little bit of financial trouble." I almost laughed. Trouble. That was inevitable. I'd heard through a mutual acquaintance that Talia's branding agency was more a collection of unpaid interns and coffee shop brainstorming sessions than anything profitable. But I kept my voice neutral. "And she's facing some legal issues." Mom continued, lowering her voice like she was sharing classified intel. "A client is claiming she didn't deliver what she promised, and they're threatening to sue. If that happens, it could ruin her reputation before she's even gotten started." I waited because I knew what was coming. "We were thinking," she said slowly, "that maybe you could step in, offer her some kind of partnership. If her business was under your established name, it might give her credibility. You've always been the more grounded one. You could help her get back on her feet. It would be good for the family." There it was again, the family. Always the phrase that meant I should put my own life on hold to fix theirs. I told her I'd think about it, and we hung up. But instead of dismissing it outright, I started asking questions, quietly, indirectly. Through my business contacts, I learned that Talia's legal issue wasn't just a threat, it was real. One of her clients had filed a formal complaint, and she was in danger of being blacklisted from a major local business network. If that happened, she wouldn't just lose clients. She'd lose the appearance of being legitimate. That's when I saw it. The opening. If Talia needed credibility, she'd have to come to me eventually. And when she did, I'd make sure the terms were entirely in my favor. I wasn't thinking about money, I already had that handled. This was about leverage, about setting a precedent that the days of me being her safety net were over. Over the next few weeks, I positioned myself carefully. I quietly expanded my online storefront's reach into some of the same marketing circles Talia claimed as her territory. I started networking at small business mixers she used to frequent, showing my face, making connections. People began to associate my name with not just tech work, but broader business solutions. If anyone asked about Talia, I'd give polite, non-committal answers, never trashing her, but never defending her either. Let the silence do the heavy lifting. And then almost predictably, the call came not from Mom this time, but from Talia herself. She sounded different. Gone was the breezy, overconfident tone. This was careful, measured. Hey, I was wondering if we could meet for coffee. I think we could help each other. I agreed, but I picked the place. Neutral territory, a quiet cafe near the coast where I knew we wouldn't run into anyone she knew. She arrived 15 minutes late wearing a blazer that was just a little too sharp for the occasion. She got straight to the point. Her client list had shrunk. The complaint was hurting her chances at new work, and she thought partnering with me could solve both our problems. Only as she laid it out, I could see that her version of partnering was just her sliding into my infrastructure and using my reputation like a borrowed suit. She framed it as temporary, but I knew better. I nodded along, asked a few pointed questions about her finances, her processes, her contracts, and she answered more openly than I expected. In fact, she gave me something I hadn't anticipated, a clear picture of just how precarious her situation was, the kind of information that could be used if needed to turn the tables entirely. By the end of the meeting, I told her I'd think about it. And as I watched her walk away, clutching her oversized tote like it was full of secrets, I knew two things. First, she was desperate enough to agree to almost any terms. Second, if I played this right, I could make sure she'd never have the power to take anything from me again. And maybe, just maybe, I could make her give back what she'd already taken. When I finally called Talia back, my tone was warm, even encouraging. I told her I'd been thinking about her proposal and that I had an idea, one that could give her the credibility she needed and bring in steady income for both of us. I framed it like a win-win, even though I already knew the real winner would be me. We met again, this time at my warehouse office. I kept the actual workspace locked, seating her in the front area where I'd staged a neat desk, a couple of plants, and a corkboard with generic business goals pinned to it. I slid a folder across the desk. Partnership paperwork I drafted with a lawyer I trusted. She flipped through it, frowning at some of the clauses. Full financial oversight, she asked. It's standard for brand partnerships, I said smoothly. It keeps everything transparent. Clients like to know we're above board. What's this about asset ownership? That's just to make sure we protect the brand, I replied. Anything under the partnership contracts, equipment, client lists belongs to the business entity until the agreement ends. Prevents disputes. I could see the hesitation in her eyes, but desperation is louder than caution, she signed. Over the next 2 months, I absorbed her agency into my operations. On paper, she was a partner. In reality, she had no access to client funds without my sign-off, no ability to take on projects without approval, and no way to hide revenue. I brought in my own bookkeeper to streamline her accounts, which quickly revealed how thin her margins really were. I started by honoring her existing contracts, fulfilling them on time at a higher standard than she'd been delivering. Clients noticed some shifted their communication to me, entirely bypassing her. She smiled through it, telling herself it was part of the process. Then came the subtle shifts. I rebranded the agency under my business name, keeping her title as creative director but making myself CEO. I rewrote the marketing copy to highlight our technical expertise and business reliability, pushing her role further into the background. And whenever we landed a new client, I made sure the billing went through systems she didn't control. The final piece came when one of her largest clients, ironically, the same one who'd filed the complaint, approached me directly. They'd seen the changes and wanted to renew their contract, but only if they could work exclusively through my side of the business. I agreed, of course, and quietly shifted them under my separate division outside the partnership. By month 4, the numbers were clear. The joint business was thriving, but almost all of that success came from my infrastructure. Her old clients were either fully mine now or had been replaced with better-paying ones. And per the contract she'd signed, all of it, the equipment, the accounts, the branding, belonged to the entity I controlled. When I finally called her into the office, I kept it professional. Talia, I think it's time we talk about dissolving the partnership. You've done some great creative work, but the direction of the business is clearly leaning toward the tech and operations side. I'm happy to buy out your share. She stared at me like I'd spoken another language. Buy me out? You mean take my agency? I slid the contract toward her, tapping the relevant clause. It hasn't been yours for months. You signed over asset ownership when we merged. Her face went pale. You set me up. I met her gaze evenly. No, I gave you a way out. You took it. And now you're free to start fresh without using anything that belongs to this business. It was calm, clean, entirely legal. And for the first time in years, I watched her leave a room without that smug certainty she always carried, because now she knew she'd lost something she couldn't just walk back in and take. The fallout started faster than I expected. 2 days after Talia walked out of my office, I got a string of furious texts from Mom. Long paragraphs about betraying your own blood, humiliating your sister, and putting business before family. Dad followed with a single line that was meant to sting. I didn't raise you to be cold. I didn't respond to either of them. The reality hit Talia harder than the emotional outrage. Within a week, she realized she couldn't legally use her old agency name. It was now under my ownership. The client list she thought she could fall back on was mine too. She tried to poach a few, but the contract she'd signed barred her from soliciting them for a year, and I wasn't shy about reminding her of that in writing. Her reputation in the local business network crumbled. Word spread, not because I said anything malicious, but because people noticed the shift in where the results were coming from. The same contacts who once sang her praises now reached out to me directly. Meanwhile, my business hit a new stride. With her gone, there was no friction, no drama, just work growth and quiet satisfaction. I expanded the online storefront, hired 2 part-time assistants, and secured a long-term contract with the photography studio that had first trusted me with bulk repairs. At family gatherings, the air turned thick. Mom avoided looking me in the eye. Dad stayed polite but distant. And Talia, she was quieter than I'd ever seen her. Her usual effortless charm replaced by clipped answers and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She still tried once, just once, to make a snide comment about how I took over her dream. I didn't even bother defending myself. I just said calmly, I didn't take anything you didn't hand me yourself. She didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. Months later, I passed her on the street. She was dressed casually, no blazer, no oversized sunglasses, carrying a single grocery bag. She gave me the smallest nod, not quite friendly, not quite hostile, more like she'd finally accepted something she never wanted to admit, that I was no longer a resource she could drain, and that the power dynamic had shifted for good. I didn't slow down. I didn't look back, because the truth was simple. I'd built my life once before, and I could build it again. But this time, they'd never get their hands on it. And as I walked away, I realized something even better.